Superhenge. Everyone has heard of Stonehenge, but did you know that in 2015, scientists announced the discovery of a massive stone monument 5 times larger than England's iconic landmark? It's being called Superhenge, and researchers with the Stonehenge Hidden Landscape Project said that there are at least 100 giant stone monoliths buried just 2 miles, or 3 kilometers, northeast of Stonehenge. They're also saying that it could have once been a Neolithic settlement occupied by those who built the original Stonehenge monument. During the archaeological dig, researchers uncovered ramps, tools, and even a spade crafted from a cow's shoulder blade. They also discovered holes in the ground where they believed posts had once stood that had been part of a much larger structure. This place was likely constructed 4,500 years ago. However, there is still a lot of mystery here. For example, researchers believe that just before the large Superhenge monument was completed, work stopped, and the ancient pagans suddenly gave up the project. Nobody knows if this was because of a religious or political change, but it appears that the larger construction never did reach its conclusion. The ancient pagans then dismantled much of the project and covered the evidence in dirt. Even today, there is a circumference of about a mile long that can be seen from where Superhenge was buried. Unfortunately, the purpose of this massive undertaking and the mystery of its disassembling are completely unknown. Caveman Flutists. It's believed that early humans spent a lot of their time sitting around the fire, bashing rocks together and grunting like cavemen. But according to new archaeological evidence, early modern humans were also busy mastering the creation of musical instruments. One of the first ever instruments has just been found, and it dates back 40,000 years. Can you guess what kind of instrument it was? It was a flute, crafted from mammoth ivory. It turns out the cavemen actually sat around the fire and enjoyed music, just like we do today. It appears that human beings have been creative ever since we figured out how to punch holes in hollow pipes of bone. But here's where things get even more interesting. The old mammoth ivory flutes were discovered in the same European cave system in which the oldest known example of art representing a human was discovered, dating back around 35,000 years. With all this evidence combined, it appears that this particular branch of human was incredibly advanced when it came to sharing songs, being innovative with music, and boasting artistic creativity. This is known as the Aurignacian culture, and they predate almost every other type of human living from Italy to France and England. The Vampire of Venice. Italian researchers believe that they have discovered the remains of a lady vampire buried in Venice with a brick stuck between her jaw. The reason that the brick was placed between her jaw was probably to prevent her from biting people if she somehow managed to rise from the grave. According to an anthropologist from the University of Florence named Matteo Borini, the discovery was made on a small island in the Venice lagoon, and it's supporting the theory that vampires were truly feared during medieval Europe, especially during the Black Death. This was a time when many Europeans were dying from disease, and a lot of them blamed it on vampires. Before scientists discovered the germ theory of infectious diseases, the supernatural was often blamed for bad events, like the plague. Believe it or not, this was the first archaeological discovery that truly reconstructed the ritual that Europeans undertook to get rid of vampires. The skeleton came out of a mass grave filled with plague victims from around 1576. Plagues devastated Europe between 1300 and 1700, and this really helped to boost their belief in vampires. They really thought that sticking a brick inside of a dead person's mouth would stop them from turning into an evil bloodsucker. Ancient Leopard Pit. In Israel, archaeologists have unearthed a leopard trap that they believe to be 5,000 years old. This happened in the Negev desert just a few years ago. According to one of the researchers who worked on the discovery, it's an exciting thing to find because nobody had expected the people from 5,000 years ago to be trapping carnivores. The researchers believe this ancient technology would have been used back at a time when humans first domesticated sheep and goats. There have been at least 50 simple traps now discovered throughout the desert in the south of Israel, all of which had been used to capture large cats. There would have been a piece of meat attached to the end of a rope to lure a leopard, and then when the leopard came and took the bait, the rope would have been attached to a stone door, which would have trapped the carnivore inside a box. The traps worked just like any modern animal trap, and this was one of the reasons that researchers first thought the traps were modern. It wasn't until the traps were properly dated that they realized how old they were. Even more interesting is that the traps were dated between 5,000 years old and 1,600 years old, meaning the same technology was used for thousands of years. The traps were probably used to capture leopards, foxes, hyenas, and even wolves, all of which were once prevalent throughout the Middle East. The traps were probably part of a defense system to keep the herds of sheep and goats safe from the hungry predators. Ancient fruitcake in Antarctica. This next artifact isn't exactly mysterious as for what it is, but for how long it has remained fresh. Basically, scientists have discovered the oldest fruitcake ever. Yeah, a fruitcake. It's common knowledge that fruitcakes stay crisp for a pretty long time, but conservators in Antarctica have come upon a fruitcake that lasted for quite a bit longer than expected. In one of the very first buildings ever constructed, then abandoned in Antarctica, way back in 1899 by a Norwegian team and later used again in 1910 during the Terra Nova expedition of the famous explorer Robert Falcon Scott, researchers found a piece of cake 106 years old. According to the Antarctic Heritage Trust, it was even documented that Scott took this exact brand of fruitcake with him on the expedition. It looks like the cake got left behind, nobody wanted to eat it, and it sat in the abandoned structure for over 100 years until it was just recently discovered. But here's the really amazing part. The cake itself is actually so well preserved that it's almost edible. Of course, this is thanks to the cold Antarctic weather, but it's still pretty impressive. The cake was part of over 1,500 other artifacts, all collected from the two ancient huts at Cape Adare in Antarctica. The Tower of Skulls. In other horrifying archaeological news, a giant Aztec tower of human skulls, believed to be about 500 years old, was recently unearthed. In Mexico, this site is known as Huezompantli, first discovered in 2015, but recently a new find added 119 skulls to the previously discovered 484 skulls. This has raised the total number of skulls used to build the horrifying tower to 603. All the skulls had been stuck together with mortar to create a literal Tower of Death. Researchers are saying that it was one of 7 skull towers that stood throughout the ancient Aztec city of Tenochtitlan, what is now modern-day Mexico City. The towers were first mentioned by Hernan Cortés in 1521, with most of them being destroyed by Spanish conquistadors shortly after their arrival. According to Rodrigo Bolanas, one of the biological anthropologists investigating the site, one of the most shocking revelations was that the new skulls came from not only men, but also women and children. As of now, it's unclear who the skulls belong to or why the skulls of children were added to this disturbing landmark. What do you think it was? To scare people? An honor to the gods? Let me know in the comments below, and then be sure to hit that subscribe button if you're new here. We have more awesome videos coming up. The Viking Tunnel of Hof. This next discovery is not quite so archaeological. On the outside, the Viking village of Hof, Iceland, looks like a perfectly preserved piece of history. There are huts, a spooky Viking tunnel going underground, and it all looks very legit. However, this is not actually a Viking village. It was a film set created for an Icelandic movie that never ended up being filmed. But it was created so well that the Icelandic government simply let it remain as a tourist attraction. Still, it is an historically accurate reconstruction, and it will definitely make you feel as though you have stepped back in time to when Vikings ruled the small island nation of Iceland. The houses are in excellent condition, with the architecture of the time being represented accurately. You're even able to pry open the doors and spend some time hanging out inside of a relatively legit Viking house. This settlement even has a dungeon located beneath a large artificial boulder. If you want some extra excitement, be sure to go at night when it's extra spooky. Have you ever visited Iceland, or Greenland, or even northern Russia, or Alaska, or Canada? What are your experiences with the far north? Did you encounter any polar bears? Tell me about your stories in the comments below. Then remember to subscribe to Talltanic if you haven't already for more incredible videos just like this one. Ancient tattoos. An ancient tattooing tool has recently been discovered in North America, and so far as we know, it could be the oldest tattooing artifact ever found on the continent. What's really crazy is that the tool was just recently found sitting inside of an old box inside of museum storage. An anthropology PhD candidate at Washington State University stumbled upon the instrument completely by accident. It happened while he was taking inventory of the different artifacts at the university. According to Washington State themselves, his find has great significance, as it could help researchers to understand what role tattoos played in the indigenous cultures of North America. We know almost nothing about the tattooing practices of prehistoric people throughout Native American cultures. What archaeologists do know is that tattooing was more rampant thousands of years ago than it is today, especially for religious groups and wealthier individuals who covered themselves in tattoos to show off their abundance. However, the big issue here is that ink is not generally preserved even in mummified bodies. For example, the oldest figurative tattoos were recently discovered on Egyptian mummies that were 5,000 years old, according to the Journal of Archaeological Science. But this is very rare. As of today, not a single tattoo has been found on any preserved human body throughout the United States. And that's what makes the discovery of the tattooing artifact so amazing. Hey, before we continue, I want to say thanks for checking out the channel. Give this video a like and hit that subscribe button for more videos like these. The voices of mummies. In a paper published in 2020, researchers claimed that they managed to recreate the voice of an ancient Egyptian mummy that died 3,000 years ago. Researchers did this by recreating the mummy's vocal tract using special medical scanners, newly advanced 3D printing, and a unique electronic larynx tool. The authors of the scientific paper said that this technique allowed them to produce just one sound, a single vowel. And yet, this one vowel turned out to be one of the scariest sounds that researchers ever heard. It was a very close reflection of how the Egyptian priest Nes-Yumun, who they had chosen for their research, would have sounded. However, the sound was not exactly perfect because the mummy had already lost its tongue, and they were unable to recreate that. Researchers also said that their model wasn't enough to synthesize entire words or sentences. But, I mean, even just hearing a grunt or a groan from a mummy is pretty terrifying. Just imagine if this ancient priest did come back to life and started uttering scary sounds. Ancient Chinese civilization. In 1929, a peasant in China uncovered a jade artifact while repairing a sewage ditch. This was only the first archaeological find, and the next wasn't made until 1986 when professional archaeologists unearthed 2 pits full of treasure from the Bronze Age in the same location that the original peasant first found the jade artifact. About 100 elephant tusks were found, plus bronze sculptures standing 8 feet tall or 2.5 meters, and all kinds of other amazing relics. The treasures had allegedly been broken and buried as part of a sacrifice, and it has only been recently that archaeologists have determined that the relics came from a long-lost civilization. They were once known as the Sanxingdui, and they lived within a walled city on the muddy banks of the Minjiang River. According to the most recent evidence, archaeologists are now saying that the culture somehow dismantled itself between 3,000 and 2,800 years ago. But the mystery here is that nobody knows why this random ancient culture vanished or where exactly they went. According to Live Science, archaeologists also found the remains of another ancient city in the same area, but it did not contain any of the impressive relics as the first. This has led researchers to speculate that the Sanxingdui people from the original site on the Minjiang River buried all of their valuables and then relocated to a new city. It could have been following an earthquake, a landslide, or even a hostile attack. But the truth is that almost nothing is known about this ancient culture, other than that they existed for just a few moments in the grand history of the world. Russell Cave National Monument artifacts. One of the lesser-known archaeological sites in North America is the Russell Cave National Monument, which is about an hour away from Chattanooga and just west of Bridgeport in Alabama. Russell Cave was carved into the earth by underground erosion and is the oldest rock shelter to be regularly inhabited in the eastern United States. As far as we know, the cave had been used by humans for thousands and thousands of years. Some of the most amazing artifacts discovered in this cave system include spear points used by ancient Native Americans for hunting giant sloths, mastodons, and even large bison. But that's not all. There have also been stone tools discovered that scientists believe were used in farming techniques within the last 1,000 years. As for the cave itself, it probably sheltered between 15 and 30 people at a time, making them literal cave people. In addition to the stone tools, archaeologists also found leftover charcoal from fires, animal bones, shards of pottery, and even the remains of a couple of humans. This is definitely one of the most mysterious and often overlooked archaeological wonders in the United States, and if you ever get a chance, you should definitely check it out. Strange new dinosaur. A strange and terrifying new species of dinosaur has recently been discovered. This dinosaur lived about 110 million years ago along the shores of an old lagoon in what is now Brazil. It was from the Cretaceous period, and the dinosaur stood on two legs. It was about the size of a chicken, but it was horrifying. The dinosaur had an incredible mane of hair with two extremely strange structures protruding from its shoulders, kind of like really long horns. Scientists are saying that these almost ribbon-like protrusions were made from the same material that makes our hair and fingernails. This is called keratin, and it's the same kind of stuff that's responsible for rhino horns. Even though there are many strange dinosaurs out there, David Martill from the University of Portsmouth in England said that this is one unlike any other. It didn't even have proper feathers. It had something called proto-feathers, which were like a rudimentary type of feather first seen in small dinosaurs. Even though the fossils of this creepy monster, which is called Ubirajara jubatus, by the way, were first found in the 1900s. It wasn't until just recently that scientists were able to figure out the size and shape of the dino. And suffice to say, it has shocked the world of paleontology. Shroud of Turin. The Shroud of Turin is definitely one of the most mysterious archaeological relics on Earth. The Shroud of Turin is actually a linen cloth which bears the image of a crucified man. For some, it is 100% the burial shroud of Jesus Christ. But for others, it's merely a religious artifact that reflects the story of Christ. The truth in this matter is extremely complicated. First of all, the shroud appeared about 600 years ago. Since then, it has remained an important religious symbol for most of the Christians in the world. The earliest historical records of the Shroud of Turin come from 1350, when a French knight presented it to the church as the authentic burial shroud of Jesus Christ. However, there is no record beyond that of how the knight physically acquired the shroud. Another interesting fact is that the Pope back then declared the Shroud of Turin not to be a historic relic. However, the shroud was drawing a lot of pilgrims, and that equaled to a lot of money. This could very well be the reason that the Shroud of Turin was put forth as Jesus' burial garb for the next few centuries. And while the 600 years of history behind the shroud is quite complex, one of the more interesting facts is that in 1418, a woman named Margaret de Charnay sold the shroud in exchange for not one, but 2 castles. And as a punishment, she was excommunicated from the church. To this day, nobody truly knows the origins of this mysterious shroud. The Reindeer Stick Artifact. The swimming reindeer is a mysterious artifact carved from the tip of a mammoth tusk. It was first discovered in the mountains in the south of France in 1866 by a French engineer named Picadau de Lille. He found it in 2 pieces, which, when put together, depict a female reindeer being followed by a larger male reindeer. What's really interesting, though, is that it wasn't until the early 20th century that the 2 pieces were actually put together to create the one single piece. And because of the material it's created from, it's generally believed that it came from the time of the last Ice Age. What makes it so mysterious is that nobody's really sure what it was used for. There are notches along one side, which some people have theorized were used by hunters to mark how many reindeers they killed during a hunt, or even how many seasons of hunting they survived. Of course, the most amazing part of the figure is just knowing that our ancient ancestors carved it from the tusk of a dead mammoth, and that they were living alongside such magnificent beasts before their extinction. It's currently sitting in the British Museum and is one of the oldest and most intricate works of art that has ever been found. A brutal murder. A new discovery from 2020 has revealed an Anglo-Saxon skull with a very brutal story behind it. About 1100 years ago in medieval England, a teenage girl came to a sad and horrifying end. According to the evidence found on the skull, her lips were cut with a weapon and her nose was sliced off. She also may have been scalped. As of right now, nobody knows why the woman needed to be mutilated in such a vicious way. The only logical explanation is that the woman was being punished for something horrific that she did, or labeled horrific by lawmakers of the time. Lead researcher Gerard Cole said that the highly formalized nature of the woman's grotesque injuries suggests that she was paying some kind of penalty for acting out, or possibly being promiscuous, or even a religious heretic. She was clearly considered by that community and its leaders to be deviant, and they felt justified in torturing her. Truly savage and disturbing. As for how the skull was found, it was originally discovered in the 1960s at an excavation site in the small village of Oak Ridge. However, it wasn't until 2020 that the analysis of the skull was completed and published in the scientific journal Antiquity. The Mound of the Dead. Pakistan doesn't get a lot of attention when it comes to amazing archaeological sites, but it is, in fact, home to many ancient relics and a lot of archaeological interest. One of the more impressive discoveries ever made in Pakistan was the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro, also known as the Mound of the Dead. The discovery was first made in 1922, and subsequent excavations revealed that the mounds of dirt discovered on the right banks of the Indus River contained the remains of what had thousands of years ago been the largest city of the Indus civilization, who had ruled much of modern-day Pakistan from between 2500 and 1700 BC before falling into obscurity. Many digs have been done since 1922 at Mohenjo-Daro. However, the city is still shrouded in mystery. There were many sculptures and reliefs found throughout the ruins, but most of what had comprised the city thousands of years ago had already been destroyed. Most of the evidence suggested that Mohenjo-Daro suffered from multiple floods, likely from the nearby river. This probably caused much of the city to move to nearby Harappa, the second major hub of the Indus people. However, scientists are not completely sure what happened to the obscure civilization, which had consisted of just 2 large cities and a handful of villages. The ruins of Mohenjo-Daro became a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1980. The Lion Man. The Lion Man is yet another mysterious artifact from our ancient ancestors from about 40,000 years ago. The Lion Man is considered a sculpted masterpiece of great originality, huge technical skill, and unbelievable imagination. As with most surviving artifacts from before the Ice Age, the Lion Man was crafted from mammoth ivory. It's only a few inches tall, and it depicts a hybrid creature with the body of a human and the head of a cave lion. Judging by the incredible artistic detail, this cat-human hybrid was meant to be powerful and mysterious, and from a world beyond anything found in nature. According to the British Museum, this is the first known representation of a being that does not exist in the physical world, and it could be the first real leap that our ancestors made from the world of the living to the world of the supernatural. The Lion Man was first discovered in a cave in the south of Germany back in 1939, and scientists know, by the erosion on its body, that it was probably passed around from person to person as part of a ritual. But of course, we don't know what kind of ritual it was. The ancient humans may have used the Lion Man as a sort of talisman, or even as a kind of good luck charm before going out to hunt. It could also have been some kind of god created by telling stories and creating myths of their own. Unfortunately, we will probably never know the stories that were told around the fire about the Lion Man 40,000 years ago. Nightmare Reef. A British ghost ship has recently been found by archaeologists in Mexico, and it's a pretty scary sight to behold. The British ship is about 200 years old, and it has been turning into an underwater nightmare ever since it was sunk for unknown reasons. Even though the wreck was originally spotted in the 1990s by a local fisherman, about 22 miles or 35 kilometers from the coast of Quintana Roo, the wreck wasn't explored for the first time until 2020 by divers with Mexico's National Archaeological Institute. The ship is currently sitting at the bottom of an ancient historical trade route that had gone between Colombia and Spain, with a short stop in Havana. But because of the size of the reef in this area, it was actually responsible for a lot of wreckages back in the 1800s. So far, there have been about 70 shipwrecks discovered in this one reef. It's a formidable graveyard of ancient vessels, and not a good place to dive if you're squeamish. Gateway of the Sun. The Gateway of the Sun is a mysterious relic located in the South American country of Bolivia. The gateway is carved from a single block of stone and stands about 9 feet tall, or 2.8 meters. The gateway is also carved with at least 48 winged demons, or possibly angels, each wearing feathered headdresses. In the very center of the gateway, right above the opening, is the staff deity, one of the old Incan gods. The gate was originally rediscovered by European explorers in the 19th century, though it was never technically lost, seeing as the locals had always known it was there. The Europeans found it with a huge crack on one side, and many experts believe that the gateway had been moved from its original site, which is what caused the crack. The gateway was crafted by the Tiwanaku people, who had thrived in the area surrounding Lake Titicaca from between 500 and 950 AD. But the big mystery regarding the gate itself is what the inscriptions found on the object are supposed to mean. It's likely that the gate once possessed some kind of astrological significance, and it may even have been used as a type of calendar. There's a design below the central figure that could represent the celestial cycle. However, it's almost impossible to say for sure. The Tiwanaku people were eventually replaced by the Inca civilization, and much of their history and their practices have been lost. The Lomqui stone tools. The artifacts we're about to discuss are so ancient that they were created before humans had even evolved. This revelation comes from the Lomqui 3 excavation site in Kenya. Researchers recently discovered tools carved out of rock that date back 3.3 million years ago. The analysis of these stone tools was recently published in the journal Nature. They were found inside of a dried-up riverbed and consisted of hammers and some cutting instruments. These tools predated anything else ever discovered by at least 700,000 years. Scientists believe humans weren't around back then, and so the ones responsible for building these tools must be distant members of the Homo genus. What's truly fascinating is that, up until now, the earliest evidence of stone tools came from a site in Ethiopia, and they were dated at being 2.6 million years old. And these tools were created by an early human ancestor known as Homo habilis. These newer tools are a bit of a mystery, as we simply don't know which exact genus created them. The scientists involved in the study believed that the tools were used for cracking open nuts and possibly for cutting meat. So far, this is the oldest proof of a human-like rise from our ancestors, using tools to help prepare food in the savannas of Africa. Murderous Chinese Emperor Tomb. The tomb of a horrifying and murderous Chinese emperor has just been discovered by archaeologists while excavating a mausoleum in China. Before this recent discovery, archaeologists were unsure who the mausoleum belonged to. However, they just discovered an artifact in 2021 that has confirmed a long-standing suspicion that the tomb belongs to Emperor Liu Zhi, who ruled between 146 and 168 AD. This guy is also known as Emperor Huan, and it's all because of a seal discovered with the emperor's successor's name on it, Emperor Liu Hong. The legend states that Liu Hong crafted a mausoleum for Liu Zhi after his death. But here's where the discovery gets scary. It's not about what was found, but rather about the guy who was buried inside the tomb. Emperor Liu Zhi ruled China during a time of great horror, when there was famine, when there were bloody rebellions, and when palace officials were being murdered on a semi-daily basis. Records from the 11th century claim that in response to the rebellions and the famines, the emperor killed and executed those closest to him. This would be the equivalent of the president murdering the people who worked in the White House because of an agricultural disaster in the country. Basically, Emperor Liu Zhi was a nightmare of a person. The London Hammer. The London Hammer is perhaps the most controversial archaeological find ever. That's because the London Hammer was found in Texas back in 1947, and yet it appears to be 400 million years old. The Ironhead Hammer was first found by a couple in Texas while out for a stroll near the small town of London. They apparently found an interesting piece of rock and brought it home. It wasn't for another 10 years until their son broke open the rock on a whim and discovered the hammer trapped inside. It became a local mystery. Then in 1983, the hammer began to attract serious attention. This is because it made absolutely no sense that a modern tool could be found encased in rock dated to be at least 400 million years old. Of course, there are a lot of theories swirling about the London Hammer. Most logical people believe that the hammer was somehow lost in the early 1800s, and then over the next 100 years, a concretion of limestone and minerals encased the hammer in rock, seemingly by magic. This would make a lot of sense, but other theories claim that the hammer somehow traveled through time, while even more lunatic theories claim that the hammer is the ultimate evidence of the creationist theory. The hammer is even exhibited right now in the Creation Evidence Museum of Texas. The Venus of Hulafells. The Venus of Hulafells was discovered deep inside of a cave in Germany in 2008, and it dates back to the Paleolithic period, about 30,000 years ago. The mysterious figurine depicts a woman, and would have been made by the first true humans known as Cro-Magnon, those same humans that carved the bone flutes and the Lion Man. But the Venus figurine is interesting because there have been several different versions found all throughout Europe. The one that we're talking about now is the oldest, but there have definitely been quite a few womanly figures found dating back to around the same time. It has been estimated that it took hundreds of hours to carve this lady out of Stone Age ivory. But what's even more interesting is that the figurine has no head. Instead, there's a small ring above her chest that would have allowed someone to wear it as an amulet. According to one of the leading researchers involved with the figurine's discovery, it was likely a symbol of fertility, and perhaps an offshoot of one of the very first religious practices, involving fertility goddesses and lion gods. The Mask of the Bat God. An ancient jade mask was found in Mexico, and it's one of the freakier artifacts that has ever been uncovered in the country. It's known as the Mask of the Bat God, and it was found inside the ruins of the Monte Alban pyramids near Oaxaca. The mask depicts the savage Zapotec bat god, and there's no denying it is incredibly sinister. Monte Alban was the heart of the ancient and very powerful Zapotec civilization, and bats were symbolic among their people for several reasons. The most key reason was that bats lived inside of caves, temples, and tombs, all places related to the sacred world of the dead. This ended up encouraging the Zapotec people to come up with their own god of the underworld, who just so happened to take on the form of a bat. Plus, bats were significant because they came out at night, and nightfall was symbolic because it represented death and spirits. As for the mask itself, it was probably created between 100 BC and 200 AD. It was crafted out of 25 separate pieces of jade and is currently on display at the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City. NonMadal Ruins. The ruins of NonMadal have fascinated archaeologists for centuries. At its core, NonMadal is a series of stone structures built over a coral reef inside a lagoon off a remote island in Micronesia. The ruins have been there for at least 1,000 years, since the first people arrived on the island with their canoes. The walls of the artificial island are built of stone, with some of them being 25 feet tall, or 7.5 meters, and 17 feet thick, or 5 meters. There are at least 827 1,000 tons of stone that were used to create the ancient Reef city. Most archaeologists believe that the site served political, ceremonial, and residential purposes. The first people to live on the island were the Saudolor, who arrived probably in the year 1100 AD. However, much of the site is a total mystery. That's because researchers don't know much about its builders. They don't know how so many tons of stones could have been used without levers or pulleys, and even today, the small Micronesian island is only home to 36,000 people. The ruins truly do give off one of the creepiest vibes ever, as if there had once been a civilization that just vanished into thin air. NonMadal has been referred to as the Venice of the Pacific, and it's also a certified UNESCO World Heritage Site. And while the original ruins were never really lost, as people have been living on the island for over 1,000 years, there are no proper records to indicate the correct history. Some people even believe the island to be a remnant of the lost continent of Mound. Proof of the Bible. An ancient artifact was recently discovered that could support parts of what was written in the Bible. In the old city of Jerusalem, after 5 long years of digging near the Western Wall, a clay seal was found. The seal dates back 2,700 years, and it may have once belonged to an important city governor. According to Israeli archaeologists, the seal was inscribed in ancient Hebrew saying, belonging to the governor of the city. But wait, you're probably wondering what that has to do with the Bible. Well, the governors of the ancient city of Jerusalem are mentioned several times in the Bible. Basically, the discovery of this seal confirms that governors did exist in the city all those years ago. Up until now, nobody had known for sure if governors were a thing, but now it turns out they probably were. The reason this is so mysterious and revolutionary is that it proves that the Bible was speaking on real things happening over 2,500 years ago. Some are hailing it as proof that every word of the book is true, and others are saying it's just a convenient coincidence. What do you think? Secret Tunnel of Death. With the help of some very skilled robots, archaeologists have just made a scary discovery of skeletons inside of a secret tunnel of death. This astonishing discovery was made beneath the Chavín de Huántar temple in Peru, dated about 3,000 years old. American and Peruvian archaeologists worked together with the latest robotic technology to identify 3 skeletons that had probably been murdered as part of a greater sacrifice. The robot was able to go into some very dark tunnels underneath the religious and administrative center of the ancient settlement, otherwise unreachable by archaeologists, and it was there that the bodies were found. The robots were designed by engineers at Stanford University, complete with lights and remote operation technology. It's now been estimated that there are about 35 interlinked tunnels beneath the complex of Chavín de Huántar, though the truth of what exactly they were used for and why the sacrifices of young people were left in the tunnels to rot is still a huge mystery that archaeologists need to solve. Mysterious Jade couple. In a Bronze Age burial site near Lake Baikal in Russia, archaeologists have discovered the strangest couple ever. According to the Siberian Times, expert archaeologists found the remains of an elderly man and his wife, or concubine, buried near the shores of the deepest lake in the world, and they had been buried there for at least 5,000 years. But what makes this ancient couple so interesting is that the man's skeleton had a ring crafted of pure white jade. But he didn't have it on his finger, he had it jammed into his eye socket. There were also 3 more of them on his chest. One of the archaeologists from the digs said that the jade rings were likely connected to an ancient idea about how to make it to the afterlife. Unfortunately, it's hard to know exactly who these people were or what ended their lives. Lake Baikal has been a popular burial site since Neolithic times, and considering 2 skeletons had already been found, archaeologists are confident that there are even more burials in the area. However, nothing more has yet to be found. Ancient hunting weapons. Some very cool weapons used for hunting have recently emerged thanks to ice melting in Norway. Scientists have been scrambling to collect as many ancient artifacts as possible from our medieval ancestors. One of the newest treasures discovered has to do with the tools that the ancient people used to hunt reindeer in the region. archaeologists have collected over 2,000 artifacts previously trapped in the ice. Most of these were discovered between 2006 and 2015, thanks to researchers and archaeologists from the Glacier Archaeology program. The oldest artifacts found were about 6,000 years old, and these included the ancient arrows and spears used for hunting reindeer. But there were some newer artifacts too, such as the shoe from 1300 BC. There was even a pair of wooden skis that dated back to the year 700, with the newest artifacts being a walking stick carved with ancient Nordic ruins that dates back as recently as the 11th century AD. Cocooned Mummy. An extraordinarily rare mud mummy has shocked and surprised archaeologists all over the world. Researchers on the project published their findings in the journal PLOS One, saying that the mud mummy is an unparalleled find, and that the mortuary treatment of encasing a dead person in mud has never been previously documented in all of the Egyptian history. Not a single other mud mummy has ever been found. And what's really scary about this mummy is that it looks as though the skeleton is wrapped up in some kind of cocoon. Some researchers are now saying that the mummy was likely wrapped in mud before being buried to emulate the intense embalming and mummification procedures used by the elite in ancient Egyptian society. That means that this mummy may have been interred with mud because mud was a lot cheaper than wrappings. It was also found that the mummy was put inside the wrong coffin. The mummy was male, dead since around 1207 BC, and yet he was found in a coffin designed for a female. It could very well be that whoever mummified this person was on a serious budget. Which of these amazing archaeological discoveries freaked you out the most? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching. Be sure to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already.